But it was also the perfect storm for me to survive that injury because there were some big factors that saved my life. One being at the end of the arena where the entrance was right to our locker room, and our locker room is right there, the medical room. It was a major sporting event, so we did have doctors and paramedics and everything there. There was people that, not just me, needed medical attention. There was people passing out in the stands. It was very graphic. 2 heart attacks were reported. Yeah, I mean, I caused that. Not good. But yeah, our medical trainer was a Vietnam veteran and had seen...
He wasn't phased?
No.
Yeah.
And he had to basically save my life in front of 20,000 people and the TV audience. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of pressure. And he was super, he was calm. So there was a lot of reasons why I lived too, because really you only have a few minutes to get that bleeding under control.
This is the Buffalo Community Podcast, all about the greatest small town in the USA, the people in it, and how it all works together. Here are your hosts, Tyler Reese and Mark Benzer.
Hey everybody, it is the Buffalo Community Podcast, and we're here for episode 96. We've got a super awesome guest with us today. It is a former NHL goalie, constantly makes the most critical horrific sports injuries top 10 lists every single year, suicide survivor, mental health advocate, author, and motivational speaker, Clint Malarchuk, and his wife, Joanie. Thanks for coming in.
Oh, our pleasure. It's good to be here again.
Yep, absolutely.
I said again, but this is my first time here.
Yeah, I was. Yeah,
it was the other Buffalo.
Yeah, you had me thinking. Well, I guess as we get started, why don't you just tell us what brings you guys to Buffalo, Minnesota?
I would say one person is directly responsible, and that's Randy Haskins. And I met Randy at a golf tournament fundraiser up in northern Minnesota, and I spoke at a couple events on that. I was around Minnesota, Sauk Center, Eveleth up there for, 5 days, 6 days, and met Randy, and he heard me speak, and he thought that I'd be a good fit for Buffalo Strong.
Awesome, that's fantastic. So, why don't we jump in my DeLorean here?
Okay.
And let's go back to growing up in Canada, and bring us to where we are here today.
Well, I grew up in northern Alberta, small community, and everything was around hockey. I mean, we had long winters, kind of like here probably. And what we did, we played hockey, and my dad was an abusive alcoholic, so I started to suffer with anxiety issues and struggling in school and obsessive compulsive disorder, all those things, and it became part of my life really. And then obviously I turned pro and played in Quebec, Washington, and Buffalo, but it was in Buffalo, and you led off with one of the leading sports injuries when I severed my jugular vein in a game, and had it not been a major sporting event, I probably would have died. But I did prepare for death. I really thought I was going to die, and that's what we call trauma. So I didn't know it would make everything trauma. Will make things explode if you're predisposed to anxiety, depression, OCD, like I was. So that's when things really went bad. The trauma set all that off, and that was the beginning of a long, trying time, trying to get my mental health back where it should be.
I saw a few interviews with you, and the sports injury, you bounced back pretty quickly right there, but you weren't right.
No, I had no counseling. None was offered, and I didn't even think of it back then. Years and years later, another player suffered the same injury, and I'd read where he had counseling, family, teammates, everybody. So we've come a long ways since 1989 when it happened to me. And that's why we do what we do. My wife and I, as advocates, we want to get rid of the stigma. We want people to get help. But that was the beginning of a long journey for me.
Mm-hmm. And do you think, you mentioned that the injury is kind of that breaking point. Did that accelerate something to a breaking point? Do you think that it was, I guess, a bomb waiting to explode? that would have eventually happened maybe with a different event, but this was...
That's the way I understand it as well. I've been very much educated, with my journey, meeting people, meeting therapists, doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists. So I've learned a lot, and that is definitely a great question. Had it not been that, would have been something later in my life that would make everything explode the way it did. But
I called his life the perfect storm.
yeah.
Perfect storm. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Meaning that it's this horrific storm, but in order for something like that to happen, that major, certain things have to all happen. And they said that that's what it is. Everything through his life was the perfect stuff to happen to create.
Going back
What
to
was- yeah.
alcoholic, abusive father,
Everything, yeah.
anxiety,
Yeah.
OCD,
Yeah.
which you didn't know was OCD probably at the time.
No. Later on, I did my mom did some research. I was a kid, and basically, got OCD, but really there was nothing they were doing for OCD back then. And, going back to the perfect storm, but it was also the perfect storm for me to survive that injury because there were some big factors that saved my life. One being at the end of the arena, where the entrance was right to our locker room, and our locker room was right there, the medical room. It was a major sporting event, so we did have doctors and paramedics and everything there. There was people that, not just me, needed medical attention. There was people passing out in the stands. It was very graphic. 2 heart attacks were reported. Yeah, I mean, I caused that. Not good. But yeah, our medical trainer was a Vietnam veteran and had seen...
He wasn't phased.
No.
Yeah.
And he had to basically save my life in front of 20,000 people and the TV audience. That's a lot of pressure. And he was super. He was calm. So there was a lot of reasons why I lived too, because really you only have a few minutes to get that bleeding under control.
So take us after the injury. You bounce back. You're playing again.
Yeah.
But then life starts to happen and starts to spiral, and Joanie's here to experience some pretty horrific things as well.
Yeah, and that kind of leads in. I'm not sure if I answered your other question about, help me out here, honey.
Your other question of
Oh shoot! What was my first question?
how did it after?
Oh yeah. So after the injury, you're back playing.
Oh yeah, okay. I know where I was going.
Life starts to happen.
Yeah. So I came back in 10 days as soon as the stitches came out because I thought that was the right thing to do. You got fears, people are doubting if you're going to come back or be the same goalie and things like that. So I had to prove to myself and the hockey world that I was going to be okay. And coming back that quick, I became kind of a cult hero in Buffalo, New York, and upstate New York. And I rode that adrenaline, that support, and that almost hero worship through the rest of the season, which wasn't that long. And it was the next season where I had my crash, where all those things I was predisposed to came. So that's when, that was the beginning of a new journey of mostly darkness and living in silence and you don't know what's going on. I'm not sleeping. I was going I don't know. It was 2 weeks without sleeping. It was because I was having that flashback when I fall asleep, and I'd wake up. It's not like a bad dream. This was a trauma relived again.
Right.
I would wake up in bed and I'd be grabbing my neck and 10 days. So I'd sit in a chair like this, so I wouldn't fall asleep, like that deep sleep, and because I'd rather go on very, very little, if any, sleep than have to see that skate come up and cut my throat again. And I was doing that, in silence. I wasn't telling anybody because, and my OCD, it was hard for me to leave the house, where before I could leave the house, but the panic attacks were, severe, elevated. You think you're having a heart attack and you can't breathe.
And you said, am I understanding you correctly, you mentioned that this didn't happen in the 10 days, after your injury.
No.
And it was kind of almost like when life slowed down a little bit.
Yes.
And you had an opportunity to process or, think about what happened. And then that's kind of when almost the delay of the lack of sleep,
Yeah.
the terrors,
The PTSD, undiagnosed, but that's what it was, started to come on full blown, like the nightmares and the panic attacks and the OCD. Yeah, definitely got to a point where I could barely function.
Right.
It was everything I could do to get to a practice and just get through practice and then go home. And you know, you're isolating too, which I was, because I didn't want to be around the guys, because I can only act so long. I can only hide it through my acting, like everything's great. And I was always a team clown, so I could do that for the 2-3 hours, in the morning at the practice. But as soon as I got my truck to drive, I was back into that darkness.
How does this affect the home life?
It almost ruined our home life. I went through, I got sent to the minors. My play was just not good at all. And that's where it was kind of a blessing in disguise, where I got to see a doctor down there who was a leading doctor in OCD and these mental health issues. And he got me on the right medication. Life became really good. I resumed my career, coached in the NHL for years and years. But over time, and that's kind of like, usually you have a doctor or psychiatrist or something, you see him every so often, check in. Well, I'm moving city to city. I got this prescription, which I could just give to our team doctor. And he'd say, okay, yep. So over a period of 14, 15 years, I'm doing that, and I'm just getting my prescription renewed. I'm not checking in with a psychiatrist. And over time, my body got immune to the drugs, and they weren't working the way they should. And that was about the time, I think, when I met Joanie. And things were good for a while, but then I started to fall off. The spiral is getting quicker and bigger, although it was gradual. Now it's like a tornado. And so what does any good mentally ill person do? Not all of us, but we get into self-medicating. And that's huge. There's a big correlation between mental illness and addiction, and because it works. I mean, if I'm anxious, I can have a couple beers, settle down. Depression, same thing, make me happy. But the problem is, what 2 beers would do, and then it's 4, and then it's 8, So yeah, it was 2 demons now, the mental illness and the self-medicating. And that's where she saw, things started to get ugly in the house, like I'm getting paranoid, I'm accusing her of affairs, and all sorts of crazy thoughts. And I heard this just the other day, and I went, oh boy. I had a friend call me, and he says, he was for the first time going through some of this stuff, and he says, I've lost the ability to rationalize almost. And that's where I was. She could say, I love you, and I love you, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not sure. The insecurities, the paranoia, obviously the other things, the OCD, depression, anxiety, panic attack, the nightmares started to come back. So I was, going downhill fast.
So you guys met 10 years after the incident, or 10,
No, we
12?
met in 05, 06.
Okay, so
Yeah, so it was a while
Sure.
after. He was already, he was coaching with the Florida Panthers. Yeah, and he had actually been sent down to their farm team, and
Well, no, I didn't get sent down. That's a bad term.
he got asked to.
A little more about that.
Well, the NHL was a lockout season, so they asked if I was willing to go and be assistant coach in our farm team in San Antonio.
Sure.
So
Let's
there you
clarify
go.
that.
That's politically correct.
Yeah,
on that.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he called and told me about, stuff he'd gone through, and just chalked it up to, yeah, we all have stuff. My mom takes thyroid pills. I figured I'm a military brat. My dad was in the military as a pilot, so I've moved around, met a lot of different people with different aches and pains and illnesses, and so it's no different than anybody else. And I think weird things would start happening when we were in San Antonio. Like I couldn't get a hold of him all one day. He took the day off coaching, and I get home at like 4 o'clock, and he had stitched his chin up with a needle and thread because he had fallen out of the shower, and stuff like that. Like, why did you fall? Why wouldn't you call for help? why would you stitch it up on your own, stuff like that. And then when we got to Nevada, I didn't know what, for me, seeing somebody drink, if they were drunk, they would be stumbling around, slurring their words, and he never did that. He'd have his cowboy friends come over because we have a roping arena, and they would rope and drink and drink and drink, but not seeing him sit there and just drink a ton. He thinks I'm not very close to the mic. He never acted drunk. But then when everybody, and he was always the life of the party, always happy and fun, and everybody said, no, he's fine, he's not drinking too much. Look, he's the life of the party. But then when everybody would leave and we'd come in, then he'd say, we need to talk. And it was the same, it was like Groundhog Day. He'd, why'd you marry me? And you'd answer him, and you kind of hesitated. Do you really mean it? Do you love me? Yeah. Well, you kind of answered fast. Maybe you're just saying it just to get me off your back. And this would last about an hour, 2 hours, and then he'd pass out, fall asleep. And then it'd start all over again the next day. Didn't want to get help. He said he had it under control. Trying to find him help wasn't possible, unless you already have a doctor. They couldn't get you in right away. 3 months, I'm like, he's not going to be around in 3 months. Trying to get him in, is there an emergency place? No, unless he's hurt himself or hurt you, or there's nothing really we can do.
When she says he won't be around in 3 months, it's not because I was going on a trip in 3 months.
Right.
It was, I was having suicidal thoughts. And that was not a day off from coaching. That was a team day off. Clarification.
That would be okay.
So, God, you said you have this, we're telling this story. What's it like to hear this and to, this is probably not the first time you've told your story together, and you sit there and you listen and to who you were.
Yeah.
Does it get easier to hear it? Does it just become part of the process of what you do as a speaker and going around and telling your story?
Well, for me, it's it causes more anxiety when I speak with her than it does when I speak by myself, because sometimes it's hard to hear the ugly Clint, the mentally ill Clint, the crazy things that I was doing. Yeah, it causes a little bit of anxiety, but it's what we signed up for.
And you talked about how hard it was even just to write that book.
Yeah.
And to put things down on paper and relive it. Talk about that.
Well, there's that ego
book-writing
thing,
process.
that ego pride thing. I think my counselor cautioned me, saying, hey, this is going to be a little bit of a roller coaster writing this, and you might open up some old wounds. It will open up old wounds. And I'm like, I'll be fine. Yeah. It was very, very hard to write, but and the funny thing is it's my life story, really. But people go, I don't want to read that deep, dark, and it is deep and dark. It's described as very raw, but it's also got some great, funny stories in there we never talk about.
But you went back to a rehab towards the end of writing the book. Yeah, he said he started. It was getting hard. He could feel himself starting to spiral out of control, and I think the team you were with noticed it and said, hey, he said, yeah, I'd like to go get some.
Well, when you're in recovery and sober and all that, and if you go back to drinking, which I did because of writing the book, I was smart enough to go, man, I don't want to go down that road again. Mm-hmm. So I went and checked in for 30 days to get my feet under me, because I knew I was going down that trail. So I gained that smartness, I guess, to do that, to recognize and be accepting of, okay, I got to get help.
Yeah, and as a spouse, you're in there. I mean, do you see it coming from a lot farther away than Clint?
I do.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the longer you're with somebody, you can even see little things, and you question them sometimes too, like, is that the start of, and maybe you're being oversensitive, but you think, this pattern's happening again, or I can see this, and I can see this happening again, and it's going, and you start getting ready, like, okay, I'm going to brace, I'm going to get ready for the crash, because it's coming.
Yeah.
I just don't know when.
That can't feel very good. I mean, to to put it as light as possible.
No.
I mean, you see the storm coming. Where do you find the courage of?
Or is he just having a bad day
Yeah.
or something? And then it's like, whew, it's okay, he's back. But that, I think that would cause a lot of anxiety if you're waiting and you don't know which way it's going to go.
Or constantly looking.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know,
and you
where
try
it is.
not to. I think you kind of get used to it. You kind of get used to being on edge and looking for it and waiting for it and trying to, get ahead of it because you weren't last time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I would imagine as we're talking today, this is the Clint that you never left, that you stood
Right.
by, that you always knew was there, because there were some dark moments and there was some trials and
Oh, yeah,
and
this
here
is
we
the
are
Clint.
today living
Yeah.
exactly what you were fighting for.
Oh, yeah. This is the Clint that jokes around, laughs. When we work together, fires me every hour.
Yeah, but I fire Haskins every half hour.
Well, we're coming up on that, Randy, right
Yeah,
now. But,
yeah.
So you do the speaking together, you do these events together, because I think it's very much a team effort.
Yeah.
Well, I think I do. I was doing it all by myself at first, and then I did a convention for a company, and there was a psychiatrist that spoke, and I spoke. We thought we got this nailed. We got the clinical professional and a story, and Joanie was at the event, and every Q&A after, every question was for her, and I went, wow. That really, a lot of people can relate to me and my story, but I think more relate to her side of thing, the spouse living with somebody with mental illness, or the parent, or the kid. And so that's why I encourage people to hear us speak together more than just by myself, because there's a lot of people that can relate to me, and probably even more that relate to her.
Mm-hmm.
So in a historically, let's not talk about mental health.
Right.
I mean that's
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
what it is. And
Yeah.
then, stud athlete, cowboy, ranch, cowboy up, kind
Wow,
of
keep going.
just right. So, but I
I've
mean,
got all day for this now.
yeah. So you're in this very, masculine
Right.
position in
Mhm.
life. Not only, stud athlete. I mean, before everything went off the rails, I mean, people were saying, not just an NHL goalie, but on the fast track to be up there with Waugh and Brodeur.
Oh, thank you.
So I mean,
Yeah.
and that was kind of that. You're up there, and that adrenaline's got to be
Yet
really
I'm not.
high.
Yet I'm in the NHL world by the tail, and I'm struggling with anxiety and depression and OCD.
Yeah.
And it's like, I should be happy, but when you got to real depression, people say, well, just get busy or whatever. They don't understand. It's not like, sometimes it's hard just to get out of bed, and people go, well, that's just lazy. Well, you got a chemical imbalance going on, and a chemical imbalance is something what a diabetic has. So why are they not judged? You know what I'm saying? Different organ is all it is.
Yeah.
So there's definitely the stigma. That's what we're trying to fight and break down. We've made great strides. And COVID has helped, believe it or not, because a lot of people that never experienced anxiety or panic or depression are going through emotional distress for a number of reasons with COVID: isolation, lack of that interaction, one-on-one, person to person, job or business worries. It's even affected marriages, and drug and alcohol abuse has gone up. Suicides have gone up. I mean, there are a lot of people understand mental illness now more than because they've had a touch of it, or at least emotional distress.
Do you think, I've been thinking about this lately, because, we're trying to de-stigmatize mental health, and we're doing that through conversations, and we're doing that through talking about it and bringing it out in the open. And I kind of started to wonder, do we need to talk about it more, or do we just need to keep talking? Because I feel like mental health talk is everywhere right now. Like, I don't think I shouldn't say all people, I feel, for the most part, I feel like we're talking about it.
Right.
And obviously still dealing with it. But I wonder if it's just time now where we just need to continue to talk about it, keep it in the open, and that maybe we're doing a good job of talking about it enough. We just need
To talk to the right people.
Well, we were talking this morning and about the community and what the community can do to help. One of the things when I was, I didn't know that she was calling them, but there was a policeman, a social worker, and another person. 3 people would come and do a wellness check to see how you were doing, because I have a history of suicide and attempt, and so I think that's a great service when a social worker and can show up. I don't know why the cop is there, maybe for a violent guy, I don't know, but the cop came to my place, was the most kind, compassionate dude that you'd ever want to meet. So opening up the conversations, we were talking about that this morning with a group, and I could see the light bulbs going off and going, that's a good idea for a community, to have a social worker, to check on the people that might still be on a little bit of the edge, going to the dark and back and forth. So but that would never, we would never have shared that, and it wasn't even part of where I would normally bring it up, but the conversation about mental wellness in the community made me remember and her remember, oh yeah, the wellness checks. So that's something this community might adopt just because of our conversation.
Sure.
That's where his anxiety comes in, because I'll say stuff he's not ready for. But I think not just talking about it more, but continue to talk about it and then implement things that can help people understand it. Because, like we were saying this morning, you can sign up for a cooking class, you can sign up for a sewing class. Why can't you sign up for a mental wellness class? I mean, who knows? You might think, your husband or your wife or your son is dealing with something, but you just don't want to feel like you're throwing them under the bus by going and talking to a doctor or bringing them in, because you can't, because they're adults.
We've got suicides happening to 10-year-old kids now. And so the conversation's got to start very young. I mean, especially now with the internet, kids get knowledge and information, way before what it was like, when I was a kid. But I think it should be taught in schools and not brushed on. I think, because it right now, and again, the correlation with addiction and mental illness or emotional distress. I mean, our kids are self-medicating younger and younger, and the suicides are happening younger and younger. So in the schools, I think there should be more focus on mental health and really educating people very young. And that way, too, you're going to get rid of the shame that surrounds mental illness. If they're talking about it younger and younger, it becomes less and less of a stigma as we grow in a society and age.
And they're talking about it and hearing about it. I mean, you've heard people have videoed. I mean, there was, I don't know, probably a year or so ago, somebody had posted something on Facebook where she was going to hang herself. And she posted it. It was live streamed, and kids were watching it. So, and then that video about the girl getting beat up in school, I mean, kids are sitting back watching it. They're hearing each other, but they're not talking about it to the right people. So they know about it, but they don't know the right things. They're coming up in their head, oh, this is not something you talk about because there's no class on it, there's no this on it, so if I hear it, I keep it to myself.
That was kind of where I was leading to that question of talking to the right people, especially when you've been conditioned to suppress that. I don't want to talk about it. I'm a man. There are resources out there, and you don't have to put it on blast, because that could be embarrassing or ashamed, like you just said. You talk about that shame, but is to reach out to the community or somebody that can actually help you. I'm going to ask your opinion on people that haven't gone through what you've gone through, and everybody just kind of says, oh yeah, just toughen up, on that. But they say they want to help. Oh, you should talk more about it. You should talk more about it. But they have no logical box to put that in.
Right.
You haven't been through it, so what the hell do you know?
Well, I had a talk to a high school group, and I kind of shared my story. And at the end of that talk, a girl comes up. You get some kids that you can tell you really hit because they're struggling. So they want to talk to you and shake your hand, thank you, or maybe ask you a question. And that's very common. But this one girl came up, she rolled up her sleeve, and she had cut marks all over her arm. And she went on to say, "You're the first person I've ever showed this to. I always wear long sleeves," because she's a senior in high school. She wears what she wants as far as her parents. And I went, "Wow, you want to talk to your counselor, your school counselor?" And she goes, "Yeah, let's do it." So, that was
Wow.
the first time for her. And they call them cutters, self-mutilation, and that is a kind of a red flag as far as suicide. So maybe I saved her life by sharing my story. And it's hard. And I say that with all humbleness, because my story is not all that fun sometimes. But I went through certain things, like, a suicide attempt. I believe God spared me for those that are still suffering. That girl, that's who I think of. And, the more conversations, everybody's got a story that needs to be heard. Some are more remarkable stories than others. But I think as long as we got a story, we should share it, and you'd be surprised who can relate to that story. Might not be my story, but it might be your story.
And it's probably more remarkable than you think, right? I mean, I think a lot of people maybe downplay how remarkable their story is.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you live, I mean, I'm living it. It's not that big of a deal. And,
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's...
Well, and the other thing too, with our compassion level, I know when I struggle, like today, not today in particular, but in today's deal, when I struggle, all of a sudden I get more, and I'll come out of it because I have tools, and when I come out of it, I have more desire and compassion to get, because I went back to that pain. And people ask that don't understand. They'll say, "Well, what do you mean with mental illness?" I've publicly stated that I'd rather have my neck cut 100 times over again than go through the severe mental illness. At least what I've experienced. That's a pretty broad, big statement. But the conversation needs to continue for sure.
I still think, though, that it unless you're ready to talk. Like the girl, she was ready. She was ready for somebody to say, "Do you want to talk to your counselor?"
She may have been ready for a year or two.
Right, because if sometimes legally too, they have to tell somebody else. So, and I was that person. I wasn't going to tell anybody. I wasn't going to tell anybody about him. I was going to handle it.
Yep. I had two really great questions. I'm remembering one of them.
You must have played goal.
No, we were wrestlers.
Oh, so
Yeah.
that's just as bad.
Yeah. So, well, you talked about, and you're going to talk tonight in the PAC, some of those tools. You'll probably talk about some of them tonight, but are there a few go-to tools that, somebody might say, like, that's a good idea?
I would say share immediately, whether it doesn't have to be, somebody that you don't know really. Share with your spouse, share with somebody that knows that you struggle. For me, like I can say, "Oh, be self-aware" is for me a big one. When I don't ignore it when I start to slide. I think it was a week ago. I didn't want to get out of bed, and I just wanted to hide and but I was very aware. I go, "Oh boy, okay, let's get busy." Another tool is that when I do wake up like that, I got a gym in my barn, and once I get that workout in, I roll pretty good through a day. I do meditation as well, mindfulness, try to stay in the moment rather than future tripping or going in the past. So yeah, I've got tools that I will share for sure. Counseling. I'm not afraid of it. I've done it enough. Before it was like, "Oh, I don't want to do that again." Now I just go and, hey, get in there and get her done and feel better. So yeah, and then being a service is the biggest one. To share your message, to meet people and inspire people. They come up to you and go, "Oh my God, you're my twin. I haven't told anybody." And that really motivates me to be in a service. Being a service, people think, "Well, I don't have time to join the Rotary Club. I don't have to." No, being a service is, baby steps, opening the door for somebody, trying to smile and say good morning when you really don't feel like it. Well, if you get out of yourself and into others, it works. Trying to help others, it really does work.
My other question that came back to me was, Was there a moment in your speaking career when you opened up and people started coming to you and saying, "Look at my arm,"
Yeah.
where you're like, "Okay, I have to have a plan for this. Like, I can't just say I'm really sorry that you're going through that. Like, I have to be able to take somebody by the hand and bring them to a school counselor if they're willing to do it, or all of a sudden the action's
There's a lot of
necessary."
events, especially if you're dealing with a mental health association of some sort, or whatever it might be, along the mental health thing. They usually do provide a service there, right at the auditorium or wherever you're speaking. And just for that reason that, it has happened to me, that people have come up, and it's great that you can say, "Hey, let's go over here and talk. Let's talk to a counselor that's here."
Strike while the iron's hot, so to speak.
I was just going to, that's perfect. Yeah, strike while, because if people leave and then they have time to think about it, they'll shrink back into that, I shouldn't do it, I can't tell anybody,
Right.
So yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
I do remember you saying, though, he was at a talk once and came back home, and it was a long time ago, you said, "God, these people are starting to come to me and tell me, and I don't know what to say to them. I'm not a counselor. I can't offer them help. I can't give them help." And then I do remember after that, when you would do certain ones, you would say, "Hey, when these people talk to me, if they're in a spot, can I send them?" And of course, people doing the event, tell them to come to me, tell them they can go here, give them this number. So
Yeah, that was maybe one observation, and hearing the story, just what you said right there is, we're not qualified to give
Right.
advice or anything. We're asking questions right now, and just like you just said, is maybe you're not qualified to help their
Yeah.
specific one, and there's people trained in this, and
Yeah.
hey, but just be that pass-through. Yep,
Right. Yeah.
go talk to somebody that can.
Well, we try not to give advice because we aren't doctors
Yep.
or counselors, but we give of ourselves support and guidance to maybe direct them to the counselor, or to get that help that they need. But I still like what you said. You got to strike while the iron's hot, because people will, if they don't get that right at the end, they might go back to not talking.
because they always think they're the worst, like Clint always said. Yeah, but people struggle with this, but nobody is as bad as me. Like, I am the worst.
Yeah.
So
Gotta
then when
be
his
the best
book-
at everything.
And yeah, exactly. But that's the stigma too, I'm sure there's people out there that, have mental illness. It's that, like, I think I'm the only one. Or if, there's other people, but they're not as sick as me. We tend to think that no one can relate. And really, when I wrote my book, I was totally shocked how many people responded. I put my email in the book, and I was getting emails and emails, just thank you, you're my twin. I told you're the first one that I've heard the same story as mine. And I had no idea there was how many people really do struggle.
Yeah. And as we wind down, is there anything that you want to say to all of our listeners, and then I'll ask you the same question, kind of leave them with that message?
I think have your own thing that you do, kind of have your own life, your own things that make you happy. I think if you're, because we were so connected, while he was going through all this, with working together. So his well-being depended on our health and our, livelihood. So you get so caught up in it. Whereas I think if you can get something you do on your own that makes you happy, that that I can't fix them, but I can take care of me, and this is how I'm going to take care of me.
Well, also for years when I was struggling, it was all about Clint, because I was the ill one. And I think she kind of just, everything, she didn't take care of her. No one was saying, "How are you doing?" to her. And it was, she's in it with you. And that's the thing, it goes back to why a lot of people can relate to her, and some relate to me.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all I have right now. Thank you so much for coming in. Things are speaking to the community of Buffalo, and even though it's the wrong state, you answered the wrong email of we're going to Buffalo, New York, but Buffalo, Minnesota will do. It turns out we've got somewhere to put you. But we really appreciate it. Thank you for coming in. For the Buffalo Community Podcast, I'm Tyler Reese.
I'm Mark Benzer.
I'm Clint Malarchuk.
I'm Joanie Malarchuk.